introduce Robert Atchison. Robert is, or Bob, is the Rural Forestry Coordinator for the Kansas Forest Service. So he'll give us some insight into what
we do, yeah. Yeah, so the first thing I think about when I go out and talk with people, I've been doing this about 25 years, working for Kansas State University with the Kansas Forest Service, it's where we're housed, is about all the things that must crop up in your minds about forestry in Kansas. And usually I just invite people to get the jokes out of the way, you know, and then we go into what we do here, and I hope you'll get something out of this. And you know, we live in what biology and botanists call an ecotone. It's where the central hardwood of the United States kind of slams into the tall grass prairie. And so when you do natural resource management work in Kansas, it's a real interesting place because there's places you don't want trees, obviously, and there's a lot of places you do want them. And when we look at the historical geospatial information we have, they've finally got a geospatial database that comes from the 1860 public land surveys, and you lay down the forest land we have now, tremendous increase, and I'll go into that some more. But so I grew up in Hayes, and then went to University of Missouri for my degree in silviculture, and then down to Arkansas for my first job, and I've been here working with K-State since 1990. So just a little background with me. My dad's a forester. My wife is a forester. It's kind of been one of those professions I've been surrounded with. But and I would just say, if you have any comments or questions as I go through this, let's just keep it real informal. Please ask, because I really want to provide you information that you're interested in. Sean did a great job helping me understand what you all are up to, the different majors you're studying, and so that's very helpful. We really appreciate that. Whoop, already. Okay, let's try this one. Try this one. There's only so many buttons. Yeah, if I get rid of that. Let's try scrolling back. There we go. Thank you. Okay, sorry. We're a state agency. We have mandated the legislative duties. We came into K-State in 1909, but a commission of forestry was established in 1887 in this state. I know you're probably not real jazzed about history, but I just would invite you to think for a moment what it was like back here and why they established a commission of forestry in Kansas. And I bet it doesn't take much of an imagination. I mean, people wanted, I mean, they had to heat with wood. And if you haven't looked at the history associated with this state, I have a book I'd recommend by an environmental historian called Elliott West. It's called Contested Plains. And Elliott he's out of University of Arkansas, but he does a great job explaining that when we do natural resource management, we have to, and we want to replicate maybe what has been there in the past as a resource perspective. You really have to think in terms of the timeline you choose, because from 1850 to about 63, tremendous things happened in Kansas. You had the Plains Indian culture. You had all kinds of things going on. You had the movement out west. You had the gold rush in Colorado. And what I'm getting at is what Dr. West suggested, was that the riparian areas that we had along the routes that took people out west were completely decimated. There's some averages that say maybe there was 6 horses per native person. I don't know if you've ever seen what horses do to trees, but it's pretty interesting. So anyhow, these are the natural resources that we deal with, and some of the issues that we try to handle as a state forestry agency. And these are somewhat representative of our programs. I'm going to back up a little bit, make sure I didn't miss something. this is our staff, our state foresters, Larry Biles, and have really enjoyed working under his tenure and with all these other people. So this is, again, the legislative mandate and what we really are supposed to do for the state of Kansas. So there we go. About the resource. We've got about 5.2 million acres here, and that's about 10% of our land area. Our forests in Kansas tend to be very linear. They tend to follow our rivers and our streams. And we describe them in this way. We describe our urban and community resources because those are important, and that's a programmatic area where we work. And I've got handouts too, if you don't want to, that has this information in it, if you don't want to take a bunch of notes. But it's just your call on that. But I did want to mention that. I got a couple handouts. So anyhow, as you might guess, in Kansas, you know, we have agroforestry resources, what we call agroforestry. And that's just simply the integration of trees and shrubs into farming practices, you know, throughout the state. The traditional ones that we know about are windbreaks and shelter belts. And then we do a lot of riparian buffer planting, which I'll talk more about. So you can kind of see how the chart plays out. When we talk about forest land, we have about 43% in what the U.S. Forest Service calls forest land. That's an acre in size, at least 120 feet wide, and 10% stocked. So that's USDA Forest Service definition of forest land through their Forest Inventory and Analysis Program. We've got great information on how this resource has changed since about 1936. They've been doing inventories. But it wasn't until recently that we started trying to capture the agroforestry resources, the linear resources that are less than 120 feet wide, because they're critical to our landscape in Kansas, both for water quality purposes, soil conservation purposes, and wildlife purposes. And we'll talk more about that. So our traditional makeup of our forest land, we tend to have an oak hickory timber type, which is exactly what you find in Missouri. It's just, you know, right here in Kansas too, in the eastern third. Is the farther west you move, you get into more of the elm ash cottonwood, elm ash locust, and then we've got eastern red cedar, which I know everybody, well, I would assume everybody is aware of what's going on there. You know, the incredible expansion of that particular species, which is a whole nother thing to research and to talk about, because I personally don't think it's just fire. I think the absence of fire. I think there's other things going on, and I think maybe more CO2 in our atmosphere may be related to this. You know, scientists are, of course, doing all kinds of research about this stuff because woody plant material tends to absorb that more efficiently than herbaceous. So anyway, I probably need to move on here. Probably talking too much. So this is kind of the conditions of the forest resources here in Kansas. And I would just say right off the bat that a huge percentage of our forest resources aren't managed. And one of the big challenges we have, even though we've been around for a long time, is trying to encourage people what the values are of the resource. Because if you're farming and you're making a lot of money growing corn and soybeans, or you're grazing cattle, you tend to develop an adversarial relationship with trees. Again, that goes back to living in an ecotone. And we want trees where we think they belong, and I'll talk more about that. And we do not want them in our pastures. And that's one reason we have a prescribed fire program that we provide training in and try to facilitate that with private landowners. So like I said earlier, we've had a significant increase, and we continue to have an increase in forest land since 1936, probably prior to that, but we just don't have documentation. Cottonwood, our state tree, dominates in volume. Hackberry dominates in number. Hackberry is a shade-tolerant tree like American elm, and so that is an issue for us because what comes in unmanaged woodlands are shade-tolerant species. So right now we've got an overabundance of hackberry, and our oak and hickory are declining. And from a wildlife perspective, that's an issue for us and for most people that are involved with wildlife management. Mast-producing trees are very important to the wildlife populations here in Kansas. We have increased in density. And a little bit of information about black walnut, which is our most valuable commercial species, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. In our urban areas, we have over-mature canopies. So we have some issues there. This is how our districts are lined out. We have 6 districts, 6 field foresters that serve large multi-county areas throughout the state. These are the services that we provide private land ownership, and that is our focus because of the funding sources we get. It's private lands. When you talk about woodlands in Kansas, about 95% of them occur on private lands. So we're always trying to invite landowners to participate in the programs and, frankly, the financial incentives that are available to them through USDA programs, because practices like this cost money to do. Timber stand improvement work, tree planting, these are all expensive practices, and generally those farmers are giving up very high value ground, not in every case, but in many cases, to have trees there. How long do you think it would take to have a rotation, that's forestry talk, but have a timber harvest here in Kansas with something like black walnut? Anybody have any ideas? I'm sorry? Good guess. You know, I think that's probably what most of our landowners think. Usually we get about 1/4 inch of diameter growth as an average on black walnut, which translates, you know, we want to see our black walnut when it is harvested in about a 22 to 28 inch diameter range. So that ends up being about what we would describe as an 80-year rotation. So 70 to 80 years would be what I would want to see most landowners doing. So you can see the economic challenges that we're faced as a state agency. Of course, there's all the other amenities associated with what we do, which tend to be more natural, just natural ecosystem service kind of related things. But this is what we do. We provide tree planting, we provide instructions out in the woods. We do a lot of field days and workshops, but the core of what we do in the programmatic areas I work in is direct one-on-one assistance with landowners. This is kind of the constituency that we serve. Just throw some numbers up there, but we do work with a lot of private landowners, a lot of communities in the state. A lot of fire districts, a huge fire program in Kansas. We get excess military equipment. I'm located out on Claflin Road, 2610 Claflin. Come by and see me sometime if you want, and I'll show you around. But it's, you may see military equipment there, and we take those military excess vehicles and we put tankers on them. We send them out to rural fire departments for prescribed burn and for rural fire protection. So what I wanted to visit with you about for the rest of the time, which really needs to be shutting down here pretty quick, right? Is the Forest Action Plan. I forgot to publicly thank Sean when I began this, this presentation, but the Geography Department, and especially Gissel, did a great job kind of getting our agency up to speed with geographical information system. And even now, remote sensing, and I know there's some geographers here, so you may be familiar with that kind of terminology, but if anybody's going into natural resource management these days, you better know a little bit about GIS and at least know what remote sensing can do. LIDAR, all these things, the policymakers that give us the money to do the work in natural resource want to see a pretty picture, and they want to know that the money they're investing in natural resource management is going on the ground and making a difference. And so you've got to show them maps, you've got to show them priority areas, and that's what we've done. These are the threats and the benefits and frankly the issues that we've identified in this plan. Water quality, a huge one, huge one. I'll talk about that a little bit more, but probably things you're not surprised to see up there. But those, based upon public input and also experts' best thinking, these are the issues we came up with. So we have to create strategies. We have to create those geospatial layers I was talking about. So to do this forest action plan, we took about 43 different geospatial layers, and we weighted those layers based upon each one of those issues. So I'll just use one example. You see probably a lot of red up there, and most of this is watershed boundary related. You know, HUC 8, HUC 12. Mainly, I think most of our stuff's HUC 12. But the red watersheds that you see there are areas that we had a layer that came from Department of Health and Environment, which has a lot of Clean Water Act money. These are areas where these watersheds are impaired from a water quality perspective. So we lay that down, we weight that as a staff. And we talk about, okay, how important is this one? And we compare that to maybe biodiversity or another. And as a staff, we weighted that, and then we provided public input on that. What do you all think? You know, what do you landowners think are the issues? And I'd just say right up front, getting public input is always a tricky business. It's hard to get people to give you really great input, and I think that is something we need to learn how to do better work with. So those, what you saw on the previous slide, were 5 classes that went from high to low. And so we took the upper 2 classes that we had geospatially identified as priority areas, and we turned them into what we call priority landscapes. Because for the targeting purposes, for the grant writing we have to do, this is what we show to people when we write a grant. And every one of those areas has an issue identified, has a strategy to address the issue, and I'm going to talk about that real quick. So for example, I'm going to start with the middle and maybe not talk about anything else because I think I'm running out of time. And I would like to invite questions or comments. But sustaining water quality and quantity. In Kansas, it's a huge, huge issue. The governor has got a visioning process gone on all last year. I was at a meeting last night at the fire station, another public visioning meeting about what are we going to do about water in the future. We know we have an increasing population. We know that we're losing storage capacity in our federal reservoirs, which provide 2/3 of the water supply to the people of Kansas. Huge issue for us as a people. I mean, we don't have, you know, some of the smartest people I've seen working on, I personally don't see any solutions. You know, we can bring a piece to this. It doesn't mean we don't work on it. That's what we do as a people, but I'm not seeing anything jumping out at me right now. When I compare the cost of dredging, the cost of getting those stream banks, which are not stable above our federal reservoirs, they're all incised. They all kind of have a U-shaped channel. And what the stream geomorphologists tell me, until that gets to a 3-to-1 slope, that soil is going somewhere. So I can plant a lot of trees adjacent to these areas, and our research does show us that that's going to slow the sedimentation rate. But that soil's got to go somewhere till those banks are stable. Huge issue for us. All kinds of interesting ideas coming to the table. So anyhow, these are the issues we've got. You see some insect stuff. The thousand canker disease threatens $1 billion industry of black walnut in Kansas, which people probably aren't terribly aware of. Wanted to show you the last piece of what I wanted to share today, and that's we took this broad geospatial work that gave us priority areas, and then we knew that if we really wanted to change things on the landscape, we had to be much more specific than that. So we started working with geography, and with Gissel, we started looking at windbreaks and how to use remote sensing to do object classification so we could find those things. We didn't know where they were. We didn't know what the condition of them was. And I threw this slide up of the dust storm in Colby, because a lot of people think windbreaks are passé. At least that's my opinion. but they still are an incredibly important resource for us in western Kansas. 10 times the height of that windbreak, whatever it is protected crop ground. And what people don't, our farmers don't know, and we're working on this right now, is they don't know that that also increases crop yield. Windbreaks tend to be looked at unfavorably like other trees because we have an adversarial thing going again with our farming community. And we've done I accept the responsibility along with my colleagues. We're doing a poor educational job getting research out. We're trying to do better. We've got research from the 1950s that substantiate crop yield increase. Pretty interesting. So anyhow, 25 million acres in Kansas continues to be cultivated. You look at climate change, you look at the modeling, if you look at not even the modeling, more drought, less, more heat, this stuff isn't going away. We're going to go, chances are we'll be back in dryland farming, southwest Kansas. The aquifer's going away. Some real issues for us as natural resource managers that our children and other people are going to have to deal with. So this is what the product we ended up with when we did this windbreak assessment work. And these are the 3 condition classes. And we use criteria to place value and condition on the windbreaks that fit very nicely with the criteria the Natural Resource Conservation Service had. Because we had to establish a resource concern to get money to landowners. So the last thing we did was we took a parcel data layer and slapped it over the top of this. And by doing that, we were able to send a letter directly through the local conservation district to farmers that had windbreaks in fair and poor condition, which was a qualifying criteria for the Environmental Quality Incentives Program to renovate their windbreaks. Before we did that, we weren't having any adoption of windbreak renovation. And since then, we've had an amazing adoption. There's some other things that have happened, too, that have changed that. But anyhow, this is all geospatial stuff and remote sensing and things that really, just have changed the way we do business since in the 25 years I've been working here. Just a little information on the sedimentation of federal reservoirs. We talked about it a little bit. We're doing a very similar thing here in assessing the riparian condition. And you can see we've got areas we describe as protection, management, and establishment. And that's based upon the amount of tree canopy cover we have adjacent to these creeks and rivers within what we describe as a 2 active channel width area of the stream. So it's always a question, well, how much vegetation do you need? That's based upon NRCS Stream Visual Assessment Protocol and proper functioning condition. But also, I want to say just right up front again that this is a very complex problem. And I don't ever want to suggest we have the answer, but we know economically it makes sense to provide some kind of incentives to the farmers to leave the trees in place. We've had tremendous amounts of timber that have been bulldozed. Yesterday I was coming back from Seneca, came down to an area where I'd planted 2,000 trees or 10,000 trees about 7, 8 years ago. They're looking pretty good, except the landowner didn't prune them right. Then I went down, and they were planted along a creek and a river to stabilize banks. It was verdigris loam, which is choice soil, class 1 and 2 soils. It's where we want to plant trees in Kansas in that 2 active channel width. Went down the road a bit further, and a farmer had bulldozed everything out. Nothing but dirt. And I would guess he's probably in trouble now, I'm guessing, because of some of the constraints we have associated with permitting processes when you do bank modification without going through a permitting process in Kansas. So anyhow, huge issue for us. We have some research at K-State that suggests we can save $56,000 per stream mile. And that's based upon what it costs to dredge a reservoir, because we have to increase our capacity in our reservoirs somehow. We have to increase our water capacity, that's what I would say. So anyhow, we just received a $13 million grant from USDA NRCS to tackle these watersheds and try to do a paradigm shift in the way our farmers and producers, which I have tremendous respect for, think about trees in these targeted watersheds. So that's guiding a lot of what we do these days. That's a lot of money, a lot to be a good steward over. Just final things, I would say. What I've learned over the years, especially in an ecotone region or any place else for that matter, is holistic management is critical. I've got to bring to the table knowledge about wildlife, about the woodlands, about aquatic habitat, I have to have people there that know that stuff when I'm talking to a landowner. We tend to get very disciplined oriented because that's what we know. But it's so critical, and I'm sure you've heard this before. When we go out working and trying to solve these complex problems, we got to have everybody there. The geomorphologists, when we're talking about water, just this whole cadre of some of the disciplines that I know you're working on right now. So we have to have the political will. That's what we're facing right now. We've done visioning for about 2 years now. The governor's behind doing something about water, but there isn't any money. So, until we are serious about tackling this problem, then it's not going to, we're going to carry on the way we have until a crisis hits. Influencing values. You've heard me talk about farmers understanding what they do, what's important to them. Critical. Relationships between people, critical. Research and adoption, critical. And like I said, understanding our landowners in Kansas, because it's all about private land in Kansas. I mean, we have the least amount of public land as most states in the United States. So it's all about taking care of public land and helping people understand their role in the public role of water quality and all the other natural resource issues we've got. So I think I went too long, but appreciate the opportunity to be here today.